Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Azure Monitor virtual event. I want to thank you for taking the time to join this event during very challenging times. I hope you and your loved ones are safe and healthy. Also, want to thank the presenters who are allowing us into their homes to do these sessions. I want to apologize in advance of the lack of professional quality of these sessions. You might occasionally hear a kid running or making loud noises. We're also going through very challenging times right now. With that, for today, we have several sessions. I'll start off by covering. I'm the director of product for Azure Monitor, and Coyote, program manager on the team, will walk through several demos to show what's new since we announced a range of capability at Ignite late last year. And then we have a number of deep dive sessions planned. We'll take Q&A throughout each of these sessions. We also have some quizzes at the end of each of the sessions, and we'll hand out some prizes. Let's start out by talking about the big themes for Azure Monitor. These are the big pillars we look at as we choose our investments. First is we want to make Monitor a native Azure experience, so make it really easy to onboard. And in your day zero, as soon as you onboard, you have a delightful experience across the surface of Azure. Next is we're making a lot of investment around the enterprise readiness. What I mean by that is managing at scale. You have a large application or an infrastructure environment, onboard that to monitoring and manage that environment, as well as security compliance. Things like being able to use a virtual network or encrypt their data using your keys, things like that. Many advances in those areas. It's been a huge area of focus in the last 6 to 9 months. Thirdly is full stack diagnostics. So we want to provide across your entire stack, starting from your application down to your compute and storage infrastructure layers, all the way down to your network. So across the stack, you get a range of insights. So when you see a problem at the application level, which affects your customers, you can go down and debug and trace it down to the root cause. And lastly, we're always expanding the reach across multi-platforms and also connect to different tools in the ecosystem to meet you where you are, to support the diverse environment our customers use. But now let's give you a quick insight into what's new since Ignite 2019, and then we'll jump to the demo. One big thing I want to discuss is network monitoring. This is a big update to Azure Monitor. We brought together a range of disparate tooling and services supporting monitoring for networks into a single solution for Azure and hybrid, announcing Azure Monitor for Networks. It's in public preview right now. So you get a single view into the health and performance of your entire cloud network with no need for any agents to be configured or managed. You can search through all your dependencies, as well as view the functional dependency and the topology from an application gateway, walk down that topology to troubleshoot and diagnose problems. We've also brought together connection monitoring. So when you have applications connecting from your on-prem network, connecting it to the cloud, we give you that full view into one at-scale view across the various aspects of your virtual network, as well as all the network resources within the cloud. So you can get that end-to-end view and identify bottlenecks and do troubleshooting. Next, there's a number of changes, more changes where, more improvements we're doing to application monitoring. This is relating to more platform support. So for Java, you can drop an agent in apps, your apps running in the VMs and managed Kubernetes environments, both on-prem and hybrid on Windows and Linux without needing to instrument your code. So out of the box, you'll get a range of capabilities, tracking dependencies, tracking your requests, and a whole range of metrics you get just out of the box to help you do root cause analysis. We also have added support for Node.js in the app service Linux environment. So with a single click, you can enable your apps to be instrumented with app insights if it's running on app services on Linux. Next, I want to announce we're at GA for Azure Monitor for VMs. This is a popular service, so you can get an at-scale view of the health and performance trends of your VMs across Azure and hybrid And then you can drill into specific VM and diagnose problems if you see any issues. We'll show a quick demo of this as well. And you can access this view from the monitor section in the Azure portal, as well as individual resource, be it VM or VMSS. With that, I want to hand over to Coyote, who will walk you through, actually show you some of the things I talked about.
Okay, so for this demo, we're going to focus on insights. So insights are predefined and curated monitoring experiences for various services and resources on Azure. So to get started, we'll take a look at Azure Monitor for networks. Now, like most of our insights, we're going to start off with an at-scale view across multiple network resources and assets. And from here, I have the flexibility to drill down to perform additional troubleshooting and analysis when necessary. So this is a network monitoring console across multiple subscriptions, multiple resource groups, and multiple resource types, all in a single view. It has three main areas. The first area at the top is my filter pane, where I can select the resource groups and resources of interest. And I can also perform searches. Now, these searches include not only resource types and resource names, but also looks through the configuration of your network resources. The second part of the Azure Monitor for networks is alerts. So this is a list of all of my alerts that have fired from my network resources recently, and I get to define what recently is, choosing the last hour, last 6 hours, or so on. And I can also start my alert definition process directly from this screen. But the vast majority of our time will be spent in our network health section, where we have color coding for the status, the resources, available, degraded, unavailable, and then we have separate tiles for each of our network resource types. And I can use this to start my drill down process. For example, we see that we have a load balancer here that's showing as degraded. So I can click on it to get additional details. So here's my load balancer showing its degraded health status, along with a pre-selected range of metrics, things like health probe status, number of connections attempted. Now, since we want to investigate health, I can go ahead and click on the health. I'll pull up a list of all of my recent health activities. I can drill into the most recent one and get some insight into the change in status. In this case, it looks like some of my backend endpoints may be unavailable. So I'd like to continue my troubleshooting. As part of this insight, we also have predefined workbooks to help you do troubleshooting. In this case, I want to focus on load balancers. So this is a workbook that looks at all of the common metrics that you may want to evaluate when you're looking at your load balancers. Availability, health status, connection count, and so on. But I want to limit my focus. Because we're pointed to the back-end connectivity, let's jump over to my back-end pool for the VM scale set. This shows me the number of inbound and outbound connections, as well as the volume of traffic to each of the back-end VMs within the scale set. I can take a similar approach to troubleshooting any of my network resources. This time, I'll jump into application gateways. So here's my two application gateways, and again, a predefined set of metrics. So maybe I want to look at these metrics in more detail. I can click into these metrics, and it's going to take me to my metric explorer, where I have the option to add metrics, perform filtering, or do splitting. But notice my resource, as well as the predefined metric, were already selected. Additionally, in the case of application gateway, we can go to dependency view. So dependency view is a visual representation of how the device is configured. Starting with my front-end application IP, the rules that have been configured, the listeners that have been configured, as well as the back-end resources to which my traffic is being distributed. So that's Azure Monitor for networks, starting off with a high-level view of health, metrics, and alerts with the ability to drill in. And the last thing I'll mention here is all of the metrics and health activity that we've seen are on by default. So there's no need to install an agent or do any additional configuration to get this type of view. The second insight that we're going to look at is called Azure Monitor for virtual machines. And this was recently made generally available last month. So like all of our insights, it starts off with an at-scale view. So the view that I'm in right now is called Get Started. And this shows me all of the resource groups, subscriptions, and VMs that have been onboarded to the monitoring solution. And it also shows me the areas where I don't yet have coverage and where my gaps are. So the two main tabs we're going to investigate today are performance, which is a high-level view across, in this case, I'm looking at all of the VMs in all of the resource groups in a single subscription. And this is a great area to do comparisons. So I want to compare basic metrics like CPU, memory, disk, network I/O at scale across multiple resources at the same time with flexibility to change whether I want to look at average, min, max, or my percentile. And this is great for comparisons, but it doesn't tell me what's happening with a single VM at a time. So to do that, I'm going to pivot to the same type of view, but instead, I'll start off looking at a list. So I can sort this list by the same metrics we looked at before, CPU, memory, and so on. In this case, I want to look for the VM with the highest CPU utilization during the last hour. So we have a bar chart on the right showing me a trend line of my CPU usage over time for this top VM. Now I can start getting some additional details on this VM to continue my troubleshooting journey. First, I can look at its basic properties, IP address, MAC address, the amount of CPU and memory that have been allocated. I can look at log events from the virtual machine, as well as any alerts that have been fired. But because we want to continue with troubleshooting, let's stick within the insight and drill down into performance details. Now, this is a similar view to what we saw before, but instead of doing a comparison, it's showing me the performance metrics just for this single VM. Now, the second tab that we want to look at within Azure Monitor for VMs is called a dependency map. So this is going to show all of the inbound and outbound TCP connections to a group of virtual machines, to a single resource group, or to an individual VM. So let's scope our dependency map here to start off with just a single resource group. So here are my inbound and outbound connections, and I can expand these to see the list of clients calling in to my resource group. I can also see the servers that the resource group is calling out to on the back end. Now, the way we display servers are slightly different. First, we divide by port, and then you can drill down on each port to see the individual back-end servers. Now, I can do this for a single VM as well. So I have the option to load a server map for a single VM. And here I also have the flexibility to drill in and see the individual processes running on that VM and the network connections in and out on a per process basis. Now, let's say you're looking at this dependency map and you see some type of anomalous connection. You see a back-end connection to a server you didn't expect, or a front-end connection from a client you didn't expect. Maybe you want to investigate further. So we're going to pivot and we're going to move over to workbooks. So workbooks are flexible and interactive reports that allow me to answer a set of related questions. In this case, the workbook we're looking at is called Connections, and it's going to show me more details on the connections for this resource group. So here we have the virtual machines in the resource group, and as I expand a machine, we see the processes running, and for each process, we have some details on the connection. Things like the number of requests and responses, the average response time, and the total volume of traffic sent on each of those processes over the last 24 hours in this case. So this is an example of a workbook. Now, a number of our other insights are based on workbooks, so we'll explore a few of them. Let's start with storage accounts. So the common theme you'll see throughout all of our insights is they start with at-scale views. So in this case, I'm looking at all of my storage accounts across multiple subscriptions and multiple storage accounts at once. So we're looking at usage, the number of transactions, the transaction over time, as well as performance, the latency end-to-end, the server-side latency, and if there are any errors. And I can also drill in. So I can click on a single storage account, which will take me to another workbook containing more details. But instead of an at-scale view, we're looking at the performance of just this single storage account. So this is some flexibility here to either look at scale or drill in when necessary. Now, the benefit of using a workbook is it's completely customizable. So if you wanted to change the look and the feel, the metrics, the queries used, or the visualizations, you can do that here. So I'm going to click edit a couple times so I can start making some changes to this table of columns that we see here. So I'm pretty happy with the columns that exist today, transactions, timeline, latency, and so on. And I like the existing visualizations. So I have a spark line, I'm using heat map, but I'd like to add a couple more metrics. In my case, I want to look at the volume of traffic on ingress and egress to these storage accounts. So I'll add a couple new metrics here. Let's add ingress, and let's continue by adding egress. And then we can do a quick preview of what this table would look like as I run these metrics, and we see two new columns added. I'm not going to change my visualization, but I can also do that if I so desired. Now, Now, once you've made these changes and you've saved your workbook, you can go to our workbook gallery to see all of the workbooks that you've saved and a number of out-of-the-box workbooks for different sets of resources. So let's wrap up our discussion on insights based on workbooks by talking about a couple of other insights that also use workbooks. We have Cosmos DB for an at-scale view across all of your Cosmos DB resources. And we also have Key Vaults, where you can track the number of requests and the latency for operations on your Key Vaults. The next insight we're going to look at is Application Insights. And this provides the APM capabilities in Azure Monitor. One of the key APM capabilities that Shiva mentioned was our ability to do distributed tracing. So distributed tracing allows me to track dependencies and calls across multiple application components and backend resources and microservices environments. So here's an example of an application map that was built on distributed tracing. So no manual user input or intervention was required to put together this map. Simply instrument your application components with application insights, and we'll stitch together all the calls and dependencies to give you a big picture of what's happening. So what are we looking at here? Each circle represents an application component running on one or more instances, and then the arrows between these circles represent the dependency calls. Now we have metrics for these calls, like the number of calls, the response time, and the percentage of errors. And we can use this as a starting point to perform additional analysis. Maybe I want to investigate the performance or the failures of a single component. I can highlight it. And on the right here, we have the option to drill down to investigate failures or investigate performance. Now, the app that we've chosen today highlights our multi-platform support. So we have components running Node, .NET Core, and Java. And in the case of Java, as Shiva mentioned earlier, we now have a standalone agent to allow you to onboard your Java applications. Previously, to onboard Java applications to Application Insights, you needed to use an SDK, and this requires you to have access to the underlying source code. So it's still good for developers that need to do custom telemetry or custom events. Is to use the standalone agent. The major benefit is you can do your instrumentation at runtime, so it makes it easier to integrate and automate your monitoring as part of your deployment. Now from here, I can select any of my application components, and I can drill down to the point of looking at an end-to-end transaction. So benefit of distributed tracing is you can take a single transaction and look at all of its calls and dependencies on a timeline to see where an error occurred or where I'm spending a lot of my time. So this is an example of a distributed tracing call stack, and I can see the time spent on each of my resources and where errors occurred, and even see the call stack from that component. Now you may have noticed a number of the application components that we're looking at here are running on AKS. So while App Insights provides great visibility into what's happening at the application layer, like end user experience and server errors and server performance, it's not telling me what's happening with my Kubernetes deployments or my infrastructure performance. So this is where we can pivot, and we can use Azure Monitor for containers to look at our Kubernetes deployments and infrastructure performance. So we have a list here, again, starting with an at-scale view of all of the clusters to which I have access, and then some information about their state. Their overall state, critical or healthy, and then I have states for infrastructure, so the performance of my nodes, my base Kubernetes pods, my system pods, and then applications which I've deployed, my user pods. Now, while we're here, I can do a quick sort on my cluster type and highlight that if you have Kubernetes deployments that you manage with Azure Arc for your on-prem deployments, you can get all of the native benefits of monitoring and observability with Container Insights for your Azure Arc managed and deployed Kubernetes clusters. Let's drill into one of these clusters and see what additional information we can get. So we start off a view across the entire cluster, looking at node CPU utilization, memory utilization, as well as node count and pod count. Now you can use these counts below to keep track of either user-initiated or auto-scaling-initiated activities to see when pods were created or terminated. And you can also get different perspectives. From a node perspective, I can sort all of my nodes by performance metrics like CPU and memory, or I can drill in to a single node to see the pods and containers deployed. For each pod and container, will have its own status, metrics, as well as a bar chart indicating my limits and the requested or the used metrics over time. On the right, I have details for these containers and pods, which gives me the flexibility to see not only the limits and requests, but also environment variables. Now let's talk about some changes to Container Insights. First, I want to mention scalability. So if you have hundreds or even thousands of controllers or nodes, and you come to this screen, it'll be a long list to navigate. So we have a banner at the top showing, hey, I have more than 250 rows in this view. Would you like to scale it back? And this is where I can use filters. And in this example, let's focus only on controllers that are part of my cube system namespace. And I'm just going to filter down this list from over 250 down to 15 or so controllers where I can, again, drill in to what's happening on a per pod or per container basis. So in the case of thousands of nodes or thousands of controllers, these are some features we have baked in to help your navigation. So to wrap up our discussion on Container Insights, I'd like to point out access to logs. If you're troubleshooting a container on the fly and your problem is happening right now, we have the option to look at live logs. And this provides a snapshot in time and shows you the logs as they're being generated. But if you'd like to go back in time and maybe perform some forensic analysis for a problem that occurred yesterday or last week, you're probably writing those logs to Azure Monitor logs, and directly from within Container Insights, you can jump to the logs associated with that container. Because I'm launching logs from that insight, I'm going to have a pre-populated workspace scope. I'll have a pre-populated query with the appropriate time, the appropriate cluster ID and container ID specified. And that lets me see a list of all my standard errors and standard outs. And that's the pivot to go from, hey, I'm looking at an all-up view to a single container to the logs or the details for that single container. Now, this is not the only way you can access logs. Typically, you'd have multiple resources all forwarding their logs to centralized workspaces, and you can access logs directly in a workspace as well. So let's do that. So we've recently made some improvements to our user experience when you first open logs to lower the barrier to entry to make it easier for new users. Instead of dropping you directly within the editor for you to start writing your queries, we give you a set of sample queries that can be grouped or displayed by resource type, solution, or topic. For example, if we wanted to look at what are the sample queries for virtual machines, I can highlight virtual machine, and then I can scroll through the list until I find the query that's most related to the question I'm trying to answer. In this case, I want to look at failed Windows logins, so I can go ahead and hit run. It populates that query within the editor, and I start getting access to information very quickly without being familiar with the query language or the syntax. Now, this same type of grouping not only applies for my queries, but for our tables, we also can group those tables by resource type and solution. So let's take a look at our tables grouped by resource type. And for virtual machines, once again, I can hover over each of these tables if I'm not familiar with them and get a brief one-line descriptions of what the table contains. So for the last part of the demonstration, we'll focus on accessing logs directly from within a resource blade. This time, I'll start with a standard web app, scroll down, and get to the logs for that web app directly. The user experience for Azure Monitor logs is pretty similar to what we've shown before, starting with a bunch of example queries. But this time, instead of all of the possible example queries, we're going to limit our scope to just app services. So we'll go through the example queries, and we'll find one that matches the question I'm trying to answer. Maybe I want to look at my application restarts over the last day or the last week. So let's find logs related to application startup. During the last 24 hours, you can see that I have 6 or 7 application restarts, and we can drill into the details of these logs. Now, there are other queries available. So I can do things like pull up a pie chart of my HTTP return codes, or I can look at my audit logs for the application. But let's focus on tables. So just like we've showed before, the tables can be grouped by resource. So the table that I want to focus on is called HTTP Service App Logs. If you're not familiar with the table, you can quickly preview the data. So this will give you a list of all of the columns available, doing a quick take 10 from the data set. And you can learn more about the column details by hitting the Learn More button, which takes you to our new log reference where we describe the columns. So I'll do a quick search here for app service HTTP logs. And in this reference documentation, we have a column description for all of the columns that we showed before. So this makes it easier for new users to get started. But if you're an experienced user and you're already familiar with what we can do with analytics within Azure Monitor logs, let's take a look at some examples. First, I'll do a quick run of the query that pulls up all of my app service HTTP logs. So we can see the logins and the requests and the return codes. And then I want to focus on how much data is the application sending. So let's take those app service logs and convert it to a time chart that displays the amount of traffic sent from my application. And we can see there are a couple of anomalies. I have a couple spikes, one at the beginning and somewhere around just after 9 o'clock where we had a spike. Now, it's very easy for me to identify these spikes visually, but if I wanted to automate this process, maybe I want to look for outliers every week or every month, and I don't want to do it by visual inspection. I want to automate the process. So we can use the analytics capabilities. Specifically, I'm going to identify outliers using the series decompose anomalies. And when I run this version, it's going to flag everywhere I have an anomaly with this green overlay line. So the green line is going to be a binary 1 or 0, identifying whether or not I have an anomaly. And this way I can automate the process and even convert it to a new alert rule to look for anomalies on a weekly, daily, or monthly basis. So that wraps up our discussion on Azure Monitor logs, the improved user experience with grouping of tables, grouping of example queries, previews, and better documentation, but still including all of the advanced ML and analytics for doing post-processing. Back to you, Shiva.
Thank you, Coyote. Coyote showed a number of capabilities. Here's a few we didn't show due to time. We're adding support for Python. We are enhancing the container capability, monitoring capability to provide a insight into your resource use so you can optimize your cost and get higher ROI. We're also enhancing workbooks. We're connecting more data sources to workbooks, as well as adding more visualization capabilities. We regularly hear from customers who really enjoy using workbooks because through workbooks, we provide a lot of out-of-box capabilities, as well as they're able to extend it, customize it to add the specific insights that they share with their teams. Now let's look at the Azure Monitor roadmap for the rest of the year. We discuss this in two broad buckets. First up are basics, and then the capabilities we're adding. We're investing a lot in the basics. This is based on the feedback we've received from you. We want to make the ingestion faster, reduce the latency so you're able to get the data sooner and do your detection and troubleshooting. We're unifying all the different agents into a single agent to make it simpler for you to manage your agent deployments. And we're also making it easy to attach to different apps, AKS, app services, and apps running on VMs to enable app insights. We're continuing to invest more in adding more insights using workbooks and other insights across the Azure surface. And we want to, there's more coming on this compliance side, being able to support private links to provide network isolation, providing customer managed keys. So you can, for doing the data encryption. Richer capabilities, we want to make diagnostics simpler by providing the ability to scope your apps and then enabling distributed tracing to detect and troubleshoot across the different components you've scoped, to improving availability monitoring using Selenium and connecting to different tooling like Team and Slack through Azure DevOps for ChatOps to enable collaboration. And lastly, we recognize we use a variety of tooling and services. So we want to allow you to export the data, the log data into storage at Event Hub so you can do your machine learning or other advanced analytics outside our environment. And now, if you haven't already posted questions, please do so. We're continuously monitoring and we'll answer your questions. And thank you for joining this session and this event. We hope you find this useful, and we welcome your feedback through all the sessions.